Well, you got a tap dancing dog in the background. I mean, that's worth the price of admission right there. See? That's Michael Flatley with 4 feet, man.
All I can think of is thinking of a song that ABBA would have written that would fit that, and just going to it,
You
dancing,
are the
dancing.
dancing beagle.
So this is the Trampled Underfoot podcast show, and boy, do we have one for you tonight.
Hmm.
We've sat all week long at our respective desks and plotted out scripting for high intense impact conversations. We've
Hmm.
jotted, we've tittled,
Copious
and
notes.
yeah, and revised and revamped. And I mean, it's just what we do, Mark, isn't it? Is
I
it's
mean,
just
it's cups of coffee and forcing myself to stay awake until sometimes 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon just to bring this to y'all.
that's right. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge to Wakanda to sell you.
That's it.
Um, I'm gonna get right into it and just throw it out.
Okay.
Uh, so a few nights ago on Netflix, I ran into a movie and I said, "Oh, this is interesting," um, and it's called. And I watched it, and it's called "Leave the World Behind."
Okay. Not have not heard of it. No.
Well, I'm gonna share
Yeah.
some points, although it's not
Okay.
gonna be a perfect. So I don't want you
Sure.
to necessarily. Well, I guess you have the freedom to read it up, but I wanted to hit you with it to see your reaction
Okay.
according to how I, and then you can revise what I said because it's never gonna be exactly what
Okay.
the way the movie the way the movie is, as you know, or the way one explains something is never necessarily. There's
Right.
more there than one would. Okay, but because I want to give you my thoughts on it,
Okay.
although you're starting from scratch here.
Yeah, I've
Okay,
never heard of it.
in that movie, although he's not the star, he's one of the actors. There's Kevin Bacon.
Hmm.
Julia Roberts is one of the protagonists.
Okay.
Ethan Hawke is also protagonist, and
Okay.
there's a few other sundry actors in there, key actors.
Okay.
Now, the movie. I'll say this before I go into the other bits, but the movie, it's like a 2 hour movie,
Hmm.
a little bit over. It's basically a family deciding to take a vacation on the weekend, somewhere half nearby, somewhere in New Jersey, in the woods,
Hmm.
and they what do you call that when you rent a house that people there's a new thing for it nowadays?
Airbnb or
Airbnb.
something like that. Okay.
They Airbnb'd a really badass house,
Hmm.
and they went over and they're doing their thing and this and that, and then they go to the beach to enjoy the beach. And when they're at the beach, the the lady Julia Roberts, the wife, Ethan Hawke's the husband,
Hmm.
looks up towards the ocean, and
Hmm.
there's this tanker approaching
Hmm.
to the beach, but
Hmm.
it's getting really really close. She's like nudging and hey, wake up to Ethan Hawke. And he goes, what? And he's, is that normal? Well, anyways, they everybody starts hauling ass because the thing freaking comes up on the beach,
Hmm.
like this whole huge freaking tanker. So they come back home, they're kind of disturbed and stuff. Like, wow, that's really screwed up. And but things start to really unravel. So as it progresses, internet drops, and all sorts of things start happening. Animals are acting weird, like birds, just a series of things. And then they say, well, let's go to bed and we'll figure on what we'll do tomorrow because the internet, the blah blah blah. They get a knock on the door, and it's a man and his daughter.
Hmm.
They're the owners of the Airbnb,
Hmm.
and they're back, and they're like, well, wait, who are you? We're the owners, and we had to come back from the city because reception and blah blah blah. And so there was no other place to go. I can refund you your money. And they have an argument with that. Anyways, the movie progresses, and it turns out that it's an attack on the United States. And there's a strategic explanation on 3 or 4 points as to how that goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And this just came out. And one of the things is the fact that internet ceases to function.
Mm-hmm.
And as a cascade effect of that, communication is problematic and
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth. Then they start to drop leaflets, and news pops up of leaflets in other places, some with Arabic, some with Chinese or Korean, likely North Korean, although it's not explicit in the movie.
Yeah.
It keeps going, and the movie pre crescendos. I'm not going to give you the whole thing, but I basically have. It's still worth the. Um, with Julia Roberts looking over a wooded area, or I'm sorry, she's in the woods hearing sounds,
Mm-hmm.
and the camera pans up out of the woods, and in the distance is the ocean, the Atlantic,
Mm-hmm.
and New Jersey, New Jersey, New York, with mushroom clouds.
Wow.
And there's other things going on too. Um, the movie has another. There's another ending a little bit further, but it leaves you completely unsatisfied, and that's good.
I hate those kinds of movies.
No, I like movies that don't.
Okay.
As long as I don't know it's not going to resolve itself in a
Mm-hmm.
positive, I'm okay with it. But if I'm given a hint that it's not going to resolve itself, that it's either positive or good, the ending, then it pisses me off because it's insulting my entertainment intelligence, let's say. But if I don't know and it ends in a certain way that I didn't want it to, I can deal with that because I'm like, well, such is life now, isn't it? That's what I end up saying. And this movie did that. So it was bam good. Well, the movie is actually from a book written in a few years ago, maybe at the beginning of 2020. I don't know, some more or less that in that
Yeah.
area. And it's written by a gentleman that grew up in Washington, D.C. and originally from somewhere in the Middle East, North
Mm-hmm.
Africa, likely Egypt, I think it is, but he grew up here. And he's a best selling author. This is a huge book. And it was created into a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the producers in it are the Obamas,
Really?
which is a, which is a screwed up, which is a slightly screwed up twist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that, this is a president, ex-president.
Becoming a movie producer.
Well, not even
Interesting career
topic.
change, but yeah.
Well, interesting project to pick up.
Yeah.
Now, this could go into, oh well, that's a far stretch because he just liked it because he's isn't he allowed to like
Yeah.
these end of the world movies anyways? Um, but it's an interesting thing. Well, long story short, it's been talked about a lot recently,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the conservative leaning online talk shows and podcasts and whatnot because of all the things involved in it, especially the fact that communication, no less the fact that Obama's involved in it, but that the concept of communications breaking down. And
Right.
also on the news, I'll finish up with this. And also on the news, there's this guy called something Schwab from Europe. Um,
Okay.
I've never sat through and gotten. but he's like a big wig and for some reason important. I think he's part of the World Economic Forum or some group like that.
Yeah.
And these are people that plan and you know there's there many consider their motives to be anti-human.
Mhm.
So this is in the realm of all that, um, where some people feel that this and that, and other people feel, well, hell yeah, this is perfectly reasonable, and there's all this and that. So there's a lot of things converging to
Mhm.
create an epic conspiracy. This Schwab guy has mentioned that there will be some crisis in the future, and it will be worse than the pandemic, where communication will be lost for who knows how long, um, and catastrophic, and so on and so forth. I'm paraphrasing what I heard, and so I'll just leave it at that. I have a few questions to pose due to that, but if you have any,
No, not so far. I haven't, having not seen the movie. About the only thing I can think of to comment on is you're talking about the ending of the movie and how it doesn't, whether it resolves itself the way you want it to or not. And I said I hate that kind of thing. I'm fine with a movie resolving itself in an unexpected way. I'm fine with a movie resolving itself in a way that you didn't necessarily want. What I hate is books, movies, TV shows that just don't resolve themselves. There's got to be a resolution at the end. It's got to resolve. If it doesn't, I want nothing to do with it. I have a couple of books on my list that are like that. One of them I was forced to read in college when I was majoring in English was The French Lieutenant's Woman. And the machine has not yet been invented that can measure my hatred for that book because it doesn't resolve, it doesn't end. Leaving room for a sequel, if there are a few loose ends that aren't tied up, I'm fine with that. If you, I mean, like for instance, The Empire Strikes Back, the way that film ended, you knew there was going to be a sequel. You knew it. You may have suspected at the end of Star Wars that there was going to be a sequel, but Empire Strikes Back, you knew there would be a sequel. I was fine with that. But the way this book ended, it was one of those, there were three alternate endings. And the way it was written, you couldn't just choose your ending and just get to that place in the book and stop. The way it was written, they flowed into one another. And you're left there going, why did I waste my time reading this? When the story doesn't end at all. Why did I waste my time with this? That's about the only thing that I could comment on. As long as the story resolves itself, I'm fine with it. Even if it resolves itself in a way that I would have preferred would have been different. You know?
although I understand
Mm-hmm.
what you say, because I mean, a solution or a resolution completes a cycle of events
Mm-hmm.
where you can actually say, well, okay, now I see the whole package for what it is. I will say that I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it depending on
Mm-hmm.
how it's done with no resolution, because mainly when a story unfolds, it's the progression throughout the story and the circumstances that protagonists find themselves in, and the details and situations that are offering many um, resolutions within context of the scenes that are occurring and such.
Hmm.
And so there's little stories and occurrences, scenarios that are going on throughout that is leading you in a direction. There's another theme that's the big thing, but when you are so there's value, in
Hmm.
my opinion, across a movie or whatnot, besides the ending, because there's the how they say the journey and this and that.
Sure.
But at the end, the only excuse I can, it's more satisfying in a sense, in a big sense way, to say, okay, it's freaking wrapped up. We got that one, kind
Hmm.
of like, let's say, one recently we were talking about, kind of like the Truman Show.
Hmm.
It had all the qualities, amazing, many concepts within the story,
Hmm.
but it also had a conclusion where he escaped the confines of
Right.
his made up world into the real world, which is also kind of a alle- allegory or similar parallel to the Matrix movie. Um, so just to say, when there is no ending, the only thing I could rescue it from your judgment, which generally I agree. I'm just giving an
Hmm.
excuse for the non-ending, and like
Sure.
how could I excuse it? And it's that I do come away from it like I when I saw this movie,
Hmm.
thinking to myself, isn't that just like real life? We
Okay.
don't freaking know.
Well, to relate it to the Truman Show, we don't know what happened after he walked out that door. So
Yeah.
his story wasn't over with, but the story of the dome and the set that he lived on, not knowing that his whole life was being broadcast on TV, that part of his story was over. That to me was a satisfying conclusion. He
Mhm.
learned the truth. And that was enough of a conclusion, enough of a wrap up of the story. Now, what he did after he walked through that door, none of us know. And I'm fine with that
Yeah,
because
there was a
one chapter was finished.
well, no, it
Now,
was the main. They gave
mhm,
you resolution,
right.
but
And what they could have done, and in a way, I'm very glad that they didn't, was they could have come out with a sequel 2, 3 years later of him trying to adjust to the real world. And I'm kind of glad that they didn't do that, but they sure left a lot of room to where they could have.
another sense, this movie that you haven't seen,
Mhm.
so I'm just giving you my sort of
Sure.
thoughts on it. Now, thinking on it with your replies, um, well, actually, I mentioned in the beginning, it
Hmm.
wasn't a satisfactory
Hmm.
ending, but it was an ending in a sense because the ending was that they're all screwed.
Well,
So the story, um, you'd have to see it to know what I
mhm,
mean. You want to, so I'll just also say it ended with one wanting to know more,
mhm,
but you can easily extrapolate if New Jersey is being mushroom clouded,
mhm,
um, and the information was offered us, the viewer, through leaflets and then discovering it and all the weird stuff happening in the movie, that there was an invasion, although you never see. Well, I don't want to. It's really screwed up. The movie. It's really
yeah.
good, but it's really screwed up. And there's good actors in it, and it's
Mhm.
complicated. But long story short, it did give a solution. It just wasn't satisfactory because
Well,
if it were the '80s,
yeah.
Charlie Sheen and frickin' Nick Nolte would be flying
Yeah.
on top of a Uh,
It would be in a helicopter. Yeah, coming to the rescue.
exactly. And that, although you could call it potato chip,
Hmm.
couch, um, good, good momentary feeling, it
Hmm.
wasn't, but it was
Yeah.
still satisfying back then because, yeah, we kicked their ass and you can go
Hmm.
on to your next thing.
Yeah.
But this had a different flow to it, obviously. And it made me think, and there's been suggestions. So it made me think, going back to what we've talked about before, we are completely connected to the internet
Oh yeah,
in
big
every
time,
way,
big time.
in every way, from
Yeah.
banking to everything.
Hmm.
Hell, DNA, in my case, and millions across the world. Um, there's not everybody is on the World Wide Web.
Hmm.
Business transactions
Hmm.
and every single possible thing one could imagine occurs online. If
Yep.
that gets knocked,
Well, they don't even have to go that far. They just have to interrupt electrical service. I mean, if the power goes out, nothing works. Just and one of the things that doesn't really get talked about, you were talking about mushroom clouds they see, over the horizon and what have you. The electromagnetic pulse from that will take out the power grid for miles that was not affected by an explosion or the bomb itself.
no,
The
you have to.
electromagnetic pulse is enough to, and that kills cars, that kills electrical grid, that kills every electronic or every electric device that you have plugged in or battery operated. It just won't work.
Yeah, although you haven't obviously haven't watched the movie,
Mm-mm.
but well, there's a whole lot of things.
Hmm.
So, but you haven't watched them. So I will say
No.
that just because I mentioned the New Jersey thing,
Hmm.
that's just a part of the. In other words,
Hmm.
that's a visual for the. But
Sure.
so it's not a localized power grid situation that went on. They don't actually tell you, but satellites
Right.
were put offline, so they
Hmm.
don't tell you what the actual. Or I'd have to see it again to even focus
Right.
on it. But something happened. The point. So the concept is, well, I want to get back to what I'm saying. So because it connects to that. Yes, it could be electrical power, but the point is, we do everything we do online.
Hmm.
That can't. That can't. We shouldn't. Let's not brush that one aside. One.
No, we can't. We can't brush it aside.
Well, yeah. So um, now here's the thing. If that were if that were to in real life happen, and they've suggested in real life,
Hmm.
like the people that think these things and work in these things and stuff. I'm being broad with it.
Sure.
That it could be anywhere from weeks to months to years if something catastrophic as that occurs. Um, Everything from as simple as itineraries for appointments to
Hmm.
all sorts of things, from benign situations to very. I mean, just um, the way companies interact with distributors for all sorts of things that people need to run their lives.
Sure.
I mean, it's anyways, with that said, we talked about a few episodes back. I posed a question. I didn't know this until I ran across it. But supposedly 90 something percent, I think it was. Don't quote me on that number, but it
Yeah.
was like almost all of it. All of our communications comes through lines underwater across the world, not from satellites at all.
Right.
A
Yeah.
lot of people think that our communications are transmitted via satellite?
Yeah, no, they're not.
No, they are not. It's
Um,
mostly through underwater cabling.
yeah, and there is a AT&T, in fact, has a fleet of ships that maintain those lines, and they're constantly maintaining those lines and laying new ones. Huge, huge cables, and most of the communications traffic goes through those cables, and you only have to hit one end of that cable, and it's gone.
I would assume that if it were me, and I don't know because I'm not in the thing,
Mhm,
but instead of it's kind of like when you hide extra, when you run extra wires when building a home,
mhm,
especially if it's a pet project,
mhm.
you do extra so you have access behind the panel
Oh
for
yeah,
extra wiring. So I would assume, I mean, it's not like running from, it's not like running a wire from one outlet to the next inside a house. It's running across
no.
the Atlantic or whatever. But
Mhm.
I would assume that people that do this would have multiple. Um,
There are multiple lines, yes. There's redundancy built into it, but they still it all still has to be maintained, and they run new lines every year to either add to the capacity that they already have, or as backups in case one of those lines has a problem, because they do have problems, you know.
so all of this came to, let's call it, came to a head.
Hmm.
Um, in that, for me, I saw the movie,
Hmm.
and then after the fact, I came across a ton of shows, talk shows, or podcasts, and other things that had slight variations on that theme as a
Uh-huh.
problematic thing.
Yep.
And then I thought about something else we've talked about in the past. I'm not staking my flag on it,
Hmm.
but I kind of have it as an option.
Hmm.
We really don't know at all.
Hmm.
Some people out there may dismiss it, but I think it's problematic. We really don't know the ability of the internet, even not with AI, but let's even add AI to it. It doesn't even need to have AI. The ability of media to persuade, to edge, to nudge, to offer solutions for problems that don't exist, to include information, to um, avoid information across the population.
You don't
And
need the
sort of,
internet for that. You don't need the internet for that.
well, don't let, I mean, well, go ahead, explain that.
Well, that's been happening since long before the internet has been a thing.
Yeah, but how do we do it now?
Well,
How
we
do we
do
get
it now
information?
via the internet. Yes.
Right.
But what you're talking about, the situation that you're talking about, has deep roots that go way, way back. The internet just made it all easier and faster. That's the only thing that's changed is the speed and the ease.
Yeah, that's not the only thing that's changed, Omar. There's other issues because this is our reality now.
Hmm.
So there's still things like radio,
Hmm.
and people do get information from like I every now and then I do listen, like when I'm
Yeah.
driving to the um,
Hmm.
supermarket, I'll turn on the radio and listen to it. But my I don't know if you do the same thing. You'll tell me. And we're kind of, but it's fine that we go because the main thing is out there. But just to focus on that, when I do get in the car and drive to the supermarket, and on occasion I'll flip to the talk radio,
Hmm.
and I listen to what they're saying over issues at hand, I'm like, okay, yeah, but I sort of feel like this is me. If I want a better, averaged out thing, when I get home, I can pop open 10 windows
Mhm.
and see that and get an average,
Look
and
at
then
it
say,
for
oh,
yourself. Yeah.
right, an average and this and that. So, but back then it was basically the media outlets that you're talking about,
Right.
which effectively, um, if they were so inclined, would do the same thing in order to nudge the public at large to have one
Sure.
idea or the other. But what I'm saying is the reality we live in now, honest to goodness, those 10 tabs that I open up,
Mhm.
for all I know, um, there may be variations and stuff, but we don't know how deep, sitting as you and I, with all the power between your temple,
Mhm.
and as confident as you are in your ability to discern things,
Mhm.
we have a problem. I'm not trying to be volatile, but I'm serenely saying serenely saying it, because we also have no choice. Like we were talking about in the green room, we're we're floating down that lazy river, and it is what it is. It's not like we can get, or I'm sorry, we're in that barn. It's not like we can. So we are part of the civilization. We are pieces of the
Mhm.
civilization. So it's just like there's nowhere to. But if all the information that is pumped into us is meant to create a certain, um, let's call it
Reaction.
indoctrination, reaction,
Mhm.
indoctrination, nudge to one direction or the other, pre-informing us of future directions of a said country or
Mhm.
organization. Um, in a sense, it's just like what you said, where it's been going on forever and a day. Other than, I would add, it's so much more effective now, and so much more honed in due to, you know, not only AI, but it's so. I guess what I'm coming at is that with a grain of salt, I can trust what I see. With a grain of salt, not that I'm doubting what I see, but in that window of trust of what I'm seeing, I have to notch out a little segment that says maybe not, bud, to myself. Maybe not, and operate under that premise.
It's always good to question information, especially if you've only heard one source. It's always good to question that, unless you see the fireball coming at you. Then you can kind of take it as holy writ. But personally, I only have one way of dealing with that. And that is just what I told you back in the green room. I just say no. I don't partake. I ignore them because I'm not going to whip myself into a frenzy about something that I can't control. I'm not going to let it eat at me because I can't control it. Media has shaped public opinion since day one, ever since there's been a media. Um, and there are too many personalities involved with their own biases, with their own agendas, to be able to take any one source at face value. You have to check for yourself. It's easier for us to research something now. It's easier for us to check for ourselves. But the average Joe doesn't bother. They hear something on the news and that's just it. if they're interested in all interested in it at all. It may bounce around inside for a little bit, but they got their own concerns and they're doing their own thing. I don't know. In a lot of ways, ignorance is bliss, but I make it a point not to pay attention to it. I don't, because it's always going to be something. We as a society thrive on the negative. You don't turn on the TV and hear good news. You don't open up a paper and read good news. You don't go to your favorite news site, whatever that may be, and see or read good news. It's never going to happen because it doesn't sell. With that in mind, you also have agendas in the background working towards a certain direction, whatever that direction may be. And it's on all sides. So you're never going to get an unfiltered view of what actually happened unless you stood there and witnessed it yourself. It's going to be placed through somebody's filter, designed to make you feel a certain way, be that good, bad, or indifferent. So the only thing I can control, I can't control what's going on. The only thing I can control is my reaction to it. So I find the easiest way to control my reaction to it is to not give them the time of day. I'm not interested in what they're selling, because that's basically what it's down to, is selling. They're selling ideas, they're selling products, they're selling services, they're selling concepts. All of it's designed basically to keep you and me fighting with one another. So we'll ignore what they're doing, so that we'll be so caught up in our own personal strifes with one another that we don't have time to really observe and time to notice. That's why I said last week, what you and I do right here, have a civil conversation with one another, is the most dangerous thing in the world to these people. Because right here, right now, we don't need them. And they can't handle that. They have to keep everybody down here, us, teeming millions, us, unwashed masses. They have to keep us at odds with one another and fighting with one another so they can stay in control and they can stay in power.
So I have a few thoughts on that. On one level, that's reasonable to me. That doesn't remove that level. It's reasonable to me. However, there's multiple. So, you know, like a maze.
Mm-hmm.
At another level, so I'll say this. If so, this thing about this show, and
Mm-hmm.
you explained that there's a there's another level which is problematic in my mind. Your choice. What was the word you used? I choose to.
I don't partake.
I choose not to partake.
Mm-hmm.
Your choice of not partaking
Mm-hmm.
and my choice of sharing
Mm-hmm.
these things that I find problematic, and you saying, "Well, Eloy, there's all this stuff, but by not partaking,
Mm-hmm.
I have cut them out of their supply line, at least for me."
Mm-hmm. Now,
But well, no, let me
yeah,
let
go
me
ahead.
let me lay this second layer
Okay.
out there.
Okay.
But if the intention is to propagate an idea, let's say big bad guy sitting in an
Mm-hmm.
office in a swivel chair in some sort of glass building
Yeah.
with a cat, and he's evil. Um, I'm making fun and light of it.
Yeah.
Like an evil whatever
Sure.
organization. If the intention is to spread information,
Hmm.
and you're choosing this in this conversation because
Hmm.
I'm bringing you certain information of things that I've seen, but there's
Right.
scatterings of things that I've seen. It's not like I'm giving you the blueprint
Right.
mastermind. I'm just saying, oh, I've seen this, and that, and what do you think
Hmm.
of it? Um, inevitably, well, and we're just two guys and
Yeah.
a handful of viewers, but inevitably, multiply someone like me receiving notions of an idea and so
Hmm.
on, and then offering, hey, what do you think of this across the country, across the world, and stuff. That mastermind with the kitty cat is still propagating that because people.
Yes.
So is the idea to convey the that initial seed pristinely, or is it to get the concept rolling in the minds of people? And this is the form of programming that occurs inevitably. We're all so. What I'm getting at is this: on your side of the thing. So I'm an unwilling participant.
Right.
As an example, theoretically speaking,
We all are to an extent.
and that's what I'm getting at. That even if you don't participate,
Right.
you're still receiving
Right.
and you're going to act according to the information that does come through your
Right.
your site. um and there's a buildup of that all your life, all my life and stuff.
Hmm.
And so I do believe that there's a I believe, without knowing names and this and that it's all propaganda to
Hmm.
sway the public at large.
Yes.
And I do believe, in a sense, although there's plenty of wiggle room to a degree, that we're confined allegorically, just like the Truman Show, and allegorically,
Hmm.
and
Metaphorically, you mean? Yeah.
just like the Matrix. Um, but and I'll end it with this and see what you say because that's a mouthful.
Hmm.
But I'm not suggesting that, oh, let's jump up and down and run out the door screaming hell.
Hmm.
What I'm saying is that, hey, look, this is screwed up. It's possible. I think it is. I'm not hanging my hat on it necessarily, but I'm leaving that slice and that spectrum of possibility, that little corner. I'm not nudging that out and saying, well, maybe. So that's basically what I'm doing. What do
Well,
you think of all that?
okay, you're right. It is a mouthful. Now, I said a minute ago that ignorance is bliss. I don't keep myself ignorant. I do try to keep track of what's going on in the world. But I also said that I can't control what's going on. All I can do is control my reaction to it. That was the hardest lesson for me to learn is what I could and couldn't control. And that I'm not going to let it get me worked up because I don't have control over it. I can't do anything about it. That doesn't mean I'm going to sit back and just accept it. Again, my default answer is no. No, just leave me alone. No. So they can come along with this, and this. If it's a law that I have to obey, like I have to wear a seatbelt in my car, I'll gladly put my seatbelt on. I don't think that's unreasonable. 30 years ago, I may have said, to hell with you, it's my body and it's my car. I've kind of matured a little bit. Yeah, I don't want to whack my head on the steering wheel either. I'll put on my seatbelt. It's not a big deal to me. That's just one benign example. I had to wear a motorcycle helmet when I rode motorcycle too. I thought it was restrictive and I thought it was in some ways more dangerous because of restrictive vision and covering your ears and what have you. This is in the 60s and 70s, please remember. So it was a little bit different than the helmets that are out here now. um
One little
But
hole in the
it was
front.
just yeah, it was just, it just was what it was, and it remains what it is. But I'm not going to get twisted up about it. And it sounds phony, it sounds Pollyanna to say I'm not going to let it get to me because I can't control it. All I can do is control my reaction. And I'm not going to sit there and watch 5 news reports on the same thing just so I can have my daily dose of self righteous indignation and romp and stomp about something I disagree with. It's a waste of my time and it alienates those around me. So why do it? I had to do that to become a happier person. I'm a much happier person now. Believe me, this is this is not the guy I was 15 years ago. This is not the guy I was 15 years ago. My wife can attest to that. But I don't know. I when I say I can only control my reaction, I can't let them win. I have to say no. You're not going to get me all worked up. You know?
Yeah.
So if I hear something like you on the radio, I'm heading down to the bank or whatever. Um, I hear something on the radio. If it's interesting to me, I'll look it up and I'll check into it. And I've come in with a couple of things and we've talked about here on the podcast that I heard about on the radio and so wait a minute, is that really a thing? And looked it up and sure enough it was. And that's how I discover stuff that happened in 2011, you know. But I don't know. If it's an important story like 2011, the earthquake and tsunami in Japan and the Fukushima power plant, I did watch that story. And in fact, I was watching the tsunami come in live on the internet and it was like, oh, holy mother of God, this is bad. This is bad. This is not some little thing that's going to affect a coastal town. This is bad. But I also knew that there was nothing I could do about it. And I had to control my reaction to it because what am I going to do? What can I do?
Well, so
And I have to do that to keep my sanity, basically, is what I'm getting at.
well, we all have to do a version of what you just said
Mhm.
because, well, number one, we don't with the option. Okay, so you remember, it's just there's so much to all
Yeah,
this,
there
and
is.
but I don't necessarily. The only okay, two things because I wanted to say so the only way you, let's say you and I in with one of those lamps in a room planning an attack on uh, a military
Mhm.
fortified installation, and we have our troops and platoons and such and this and that. The only way we can properly reach our objective in that campaign
Right.
as a base. We need the troops, we need the locations, we need all the equipment, we need the
Sure.
intel, we need all. But as a base, like level, we need a map,
Hmm.
and we need to know what is what. And I'm even suggesting that we don't even have a map in terms of like when something comes across our table, or I'm sorry, our screen,
Hmm.
or our we're getting a clipping
Hmm.
of an idea, this and that.
Hmm.
Um, to even make decisive, for instance, actually, this is well. Go ahead. You had
They
something.
don't want you decisive. They don't want you to have a map. They want you to hang on every word that they say. You don't have to think about it. They're going to tell you what to think.
No, but okay. So yeah. So, but I'm just saying that in respect to us being able to even plot out what we're looking at, in
Hmm.
any given topic.
Yeah.
When it comes to things of propaganda, in
Hmm.
terms of politics, war, this things that shift and push and nudge at on the world stage, we're obviously just
Yeah.
citizen Joe,
Hmm.
from our vantage point looking at. But there's a system at work
Hmm.
that bullhorns the
Yep.
latest and greatest updates of said occurrences
Hmm.
at home and across the world. And but when in fact it's not like citizen Joe hears the news about X, Y, and Z occurring at such and such a place, and then they jump on their motorcycle and put on their evil Knievel hat, helmet,
Hmm.
and then race down to rescue the day like Spider-Man or Batman with his
Right.
sidekick, Tonto.
Because they know you won't. Yeah.
Well, that's not the conclusion. So I wouldn't. Well, damn, dude, you always throw me into. The problem is I was going. Okay, so I'll answer my thought upon that
Yeah.
thing. The problem, it's another side road. See, this is what I'm saying about the maze of a
It
situation that,
is. It's a spider's web
yes, it's a, so the problem,
on purpose.
the problem is that everything's a spider's web.
Hmm.
But to answer, and the populace at large, as far as we can tell,
Hmm.
most people agreeably try to get on with it regardless of the savage news that may or may not
Yeah.
come in front of them. And there's only one way that a human being can deal with such barbarism, such as war and people's heads getting chopped and just crazy stuff. There's only one overall way that people can deal with such things, and it's basically to, I don't want to say none the wiser, but sort of, it's sort of a distant, as long as it's not in your backyard, as long as
Right.
they're not
Hmm.
at your door,
Hmm.
then there's sort of this, but
Detachment.
detachment. So that's okay. But now to answer that you said, which is a side road, but there are people in our population
Hmm. That would do that.
that are pitchfork and torches all the
Hmm.
way,
Right.
and hence you see people like we saw a few years ago over questions of something that occurred in one state
Hmm.
reacting to it somewhere else,
Hmm.
and in reaction burning down buildings, businesses,
Hmm.
hurting people, and all sorts of crazy stuff. Go ahead.
And let's get back to the propaganda that you're talking about, because they may or may not choose to report that story depending upon where you are. Now, they reported it here because it was happening here locally. Well, relatively locally, 200 miles away. But anything, it's kind of like living in California. If it didn't happen in Los Angeles or San Francisco, did it really happen? Nobody knows, because that's where the population centers are. That's where the money is. That's what they're going to talk about. You know, that's where everything happens. So that's what they're going to focus on. But it's all a part of that propaganda thing. They're going to tell you what they, number one, they're going to tell you what they want you to hear. Then they're going to tell you how you should feel about it, what you should think about it, what side you should take. And that percentage of the population who is willing to take up pitchforks and torches, or throw on the Evil Knievel motorcycle helmet and jump on their motorcycles, they're going to label them one thing or another depending upon how they want you to feel about that group. They
Okay,
know a certain percentage is going to react physically.
okay, okay. On that line, which I agree with, because I mean, this is
Hmm.
what we're. But I want to add to the problem.
Hmm.
I mean, I
Yep.
think that this is the furtherance of that.
Hmm.
Those people that go in that direction, as you've said, which we have
Hmm.
seen in the past, happens to also be problematically, in my opinion, that I've recently, it gets worse and worse the more you think on it. Um, I mean, I'm not bouncing off the walls with it, but
And
I'm analyzing it. Let's be clear.
you just nailed it, but go ahead. Yes.
So here's the thing with those people that you just said we were talking about and whatnot.
Mhm.
That is the moment of a fork in the road. So there's another problem, which is the fork in the road. You have people cattling in one direction
Mhm.
in order to torch and burn down.
Mhm.
And then you have those that have, and I'm being sarcastic slightly, but not, but slightly, because it is the better way to a point,
Mhm.
to a great point. Because
Mhm.
if your decision is initial death and destruction, well, boy, that's kind of rash.
Mhm.
But I want to be very nuanced. That there's a fork in the road, and that decision, as a viewer at home eating popcorn for the most part across America, let's say,
Mhm.
well, I wouldn't. That's just insanity. They're going off in this direction. And now
Mhm.
you have prepared for you the voices that will counter the stupid actions of these torch and pitchfork people.
Mhm.
But they're also now injecting variations on the opposite theme,
Mhm.
which are likewise problematic in a sort of different way. And the forking of the road continues in each
Mhm.
direction. And in other words, and I could give you what the
And
alternate problems are. I'll give you what the alternate problems
and,
are without being too
but
descriptive. But
and
let me,
that's why I described it as a spider's web, because there are so many forks in the road. You're not even sure which piece of pavement you're standing on.
very good. So, but I'll give you the other one
Mhm.
because we know without implying, without saying it outright, we know broadly the groupings
Mhm.
that are heading over to torch and burn and maim and lame and this and that in the situations we were talking about a couple of years back. Oh, we have already in our minds. We can, if we've seen any news, we
Mhm.
kind of know where we're going. But I'm suggesting now, so that's, I think, quite understandable. That's not reasonable to do. We understand that this is a savage act. But now we have the fork in the road, and we have people starting to say, okay, well, let's opine on what we're seeing over there. There's correct things that are reasonable, but then they're injecting other situations, which, such as the, let's call it the sports team or color. See, I don't want to bring. Let's call it the sports team situation
Mentality. Yeah.
mentality. So you've got this group of people and us. Let's talk about what's reasonable here, folks, because we are reasonable people and they are unreasonable people. But we, us, the use of we, and on its own, there's nothing wrong with it. But in the context of an ocean of problems waving into the sea, into the shore line, and hitting up against those
Mhm.
buildings and whatnot on the boardwalk, um, the use of we, idiots and well-intentioned and intelligent and everything in between type people that don't agree with the pitchfork thing are now listening to the we and us compared to them, but then other suggestions start to creep in and the divisions further along various
Mhm.
lines. Let's give it that
Yeah.
without being more explicit than that. And so now we have the foundations of more and more confusion,
Mhm.
one group clashing with the, and all the
Yeah.
variations.
Well, again, you're describing different symptoms of the same disease. You've got fever, you've got chills, you've got vomiting, you've got congestion.
And
They're
leakage.
all the same disease.
Yeah.
There's just different symptoms. And it goes back to what I'm saying. They want us, the unwashed masses, to stay at odds with one another and keep fighting amongst ourselves so we won't look too hard at what they're doing. And God forbid we sit here and have a civil discussion and come to some form of an agreement, because that's the last thing they want. They don't want agreement. They don't want agreement on any of these issues. They're not happy unless we're fighting amongst themselves. All of us have that relative who isn't happy unless there's family drama. That's what we've got going on. I just choose not to partake. I'm not going to participate in that kind of thing, simply because all it does is make them richer, more powerful, and it pisses off everybody around me. I'm not doing it. No, I'm not doing it. I don't stay ignorant. I will keep abreast on what's going on, but I don't believe anything one source says. Unless, like I say, I see the fireball heading towards me, then I consider that holy writ. But if I get anything from anywhere about any story, I want several sources, because you can take the same story and write it in four different ways and have four different good guys and four different bad guys, depending upon your point of view.
So
And
if you were an
I don't
evil,
like that many. I don't like that many filters. Go ahead.
so if you were part of an evil cabal,
Mm-hmm.
this is
Mm-hmm.
a what if scenario. With all the money in the world in your cabal,
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to control the population, let's
Mm-hmm.
keep it localized,
Okay.
broadly speaking, to the US. Let's say you're part of an evil cabal, your hands in everything and then some. You're one of a small group of highly um, terribly intentioned but incredibly wealthy and powerful group,
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to keep the population of 300 plus million people, um, let's say for this scenario, busy and stupid stuff,
Mm-hmm.
busy, entertained, and stupid stuff. I have one concept in mind, but what would be one, just out of, because there's so many different variations, but what would be one way to keep the population all dumbassed and ignorant and freaking without them knowing? They could, to each other they would look like, oh yes, and this and that, but to them, knowing that they're pulling strings like a
Mm-hmm.
they would look like
If you control information, you control the public. If you control their health care, you control their bodies. And if you can excite those pleasure areas in the brain, you have them body and soul. And you end up with idiocracy. That movie, Idiocracy. That's what you end up with. If you can control the information and get them to think the way you think, and get them to feel the way you feel, and get them to follow that propaganda, give them just enough to where they can, like I said, trigger those pleasure centers, be it with alcohol, be it with drugs, be it with, let's keep it polite for YouTube, pleasures of the flesh. If you can keep all that, keep them entertained with the mundane that's on television. It worked for the Soviet Union for how many years? It was only when people discovered that there was a bright, beautiful world out there, and one guy in their system decided to kind of loosen up a little bit on their reins. That's when it collapsed, because they no longer had control of information. They no longer had control of their bodies through healthcare. The minute you remove choice or options, you own them. If there's one store if there's one phone company, let's take phone company out of it. If there is one store, if there is one internet service provider, if there is one brand of telephone, of cell phone, if there is one place to go to get your health care, if there is one person or one entity writing your paycheck and one source of information, you own everybody within that border. It's only when they discover that there are options that things start to crumble. And maybe that's what we're witnessing. Maybe we've got this all wrong. Maybe what we're witnessing is the crumbling of these houses of cards that the media had and was built on, because it used to be three networks and a few big newspapers: New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle Examiner, the LA Times, a few big newspapers, Wall Street Journal. Now information is out there from more sources than you can count. And these big companies are scrambling to remain relevant because people just have so many options. They're not forced to listen through those filters anymore. So maybe that's what we're seeing, is the crumbling of those towers, and nobody really knows how to react to it. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I got lots of questions, but all I can do is observe and form opinions based on those observations and what I've seen. I The only conclusion that I can come up with, and this is my own opinion, I think it's all a con. It's all propaganda. Reporting that there were, reporting that there was a car accident or a train derailed. That's hard news. This train derailed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 cars came off the track. There were 2 minor injuries, but no fatalities. That's reporting the news. Spinning it to say we've got to get rid of these rail lines here in the town because this is the 3rd time it's happened in 150 years, and how many more people have to get hurt about it. That to me is an unreasonable response. So I'm not going to participate in that. But it happened. You informed me. Thank you very much. That's as far as I'll go. And I don't give them the time of day after that. So maybe that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that those ivory towers crumble, and they don't know what to do. So they're trying anything to keep relevancy. I don't know.
So the Soviet Union, unlike the United States, since we're free,
Mm-hmm.
had compulsory a whole bunch of stuff
Oh yeah.
because everything was um, controlled by
Mm-hmm.
the people over there, which essentially meant nobody controlled anything, the means of production and such. It was
Right.
all
It
a
was certain
government,
certain elites in the within the government. Yes.
right? But the thing was, it's for the people,
Mm-hmm.
according to them, and that's a joyous occasion for all.
Oh yeah.
Um, however, but we're free now. In comparison, it's night and day. But if I were to be that evil mastermind cabal that I was talking about, that
Mm-hmm.
you gave your particular
Mm-hmm.
angle on, and there's many ways of like sort of navigate and looking and saying, how
Mm-hmm.
about this, because there's a lot. But the one that had popped in my mind in terms of media and such and this and that was that I would, because since people are like, for instance, any two people, as we know, will
Mm-hmm.
disagree on any number of things, let alone 300 plus million people.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have different tastes um, for every different subject under the sun,
Mm-hmm.
according to people's preferences. And so, how do you control people that have so much variation. What's good for one for the other one would be unbearable, and for this and this and that, and that would be to offer a selection of 31 flavors of Baskin Robbins of things to think and believe and coincide with and be outraged about or not be outraged about and stuff. And so I'd also fund as much media as my organization can fund to put out commercials that aren't commercials and have those lips of those reporters move in the way that I want them to move
Hmm.
to
Control the
report
information.
to report the things in the way that I want them reported,
Yep.
not because I want them reported, not because I want the reaction to be immediate and thunderous, but I want it to me. This is if it were me, I would want it to like ingredients in a soup or stew, boil and bubble little by little, trickling in through potatoes and carrots and mixing
Um,
in well and build up. And I would also, if it were me, oh yeah, give me $1 billion. You just watch. Um, Also, if it were me, I would likewise fund everyone on one side or another on every given issue. People that are trusted by people like the public at large because they're quite, let's say, conservative or liberal or righteous in this category or that one. I would percolate, and that's kind of in a softball way what lobbyists do anyhow, according to their specific needs.
well, yeah, they have a specific interest that they're gonna. Yeah.
Hmm. But at the mastermind level, let's say, and this is all the what if that we were talking
Hmm.
about.
Sure.
I mean, with money to burn. And so then now the public at large has options. They don't even know their options. They're given this information. They're like, well, A doesn't sound reasonable to me because I don't think that violence is good. But then to another guy's like, yeah, power to the people, mofos. And they'll be off on that tangent. And essentially, you have a whole hot mess of everything. And obviously, like, we can't live our lives like that. This is just a what if thing. I
Well,
think there's something to it at that little slice that I said within the spectrum of possibilities. So I'm just putting that out there.
well, your benevolence is showing
Okay.
because what you initiated this mind exercise by saying you wanted just to keep them dumb, happy, and obedient.
Hmm.
Okay. And I say your benevolence is showing because you are offering options. You can't give options and maintain control. There can't be 31 flavors. You might offer two. You can't throw carrots and seasonings into the stew. You convince them that potatoes and turnips are all you need. Anything else is greedy. You don't need that because you're taking away from somebody else. And you don't get celebrities on your side. You decide who the celebrity is. The news media, there is one option. You don't have choices. Maybe there's a second channel, but they're getting the news from that first office. You control information, you control options, and you control their bodies through healthcare. You own them. You don't give them options. There are two models of car you can buy. We decide if you need one or not. You only go into work, you can ride the bus. You don't need a car.
But so
And
I don't think so.
the alcohol is there to keep them happy. simply because they're choiceless to do anything else. And if you rise up and romp and stomp, your neighbor gives us a little phone call and two guys in furry hats in a car visit you and nobody ever sees you again. That's how you keep control.
So I disagree. What you did there was reduce the amount of variations that are allowed.
Hmm. Well, you asked about control, and that's how you do it.
Yeah. So you reduce the amount of variations allowed,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's a problem at all. At all. And I'll say, and so look, it doesn't matter
Hmm.
that there's options because whatever that machine is in this scenario that we're talking about, if I were particularly part of that cabal and stuff like that, there's no way today, tomorrow, or any day
Hmm.
that a handful of people with a lot of power and
Hmm.
maybe endless fountains of cash
Yeah.
and connections, well, there's no way that they can control 340 some odd million people outright. So by default, there's no way.
Yeah, it
So
would be a
if
bloodbath at first, but eventually, you're right. It would be hard to control 334 million people. It would be
yeah,
much easier to control 120.
well, yeah, but my point is that so there's something called the gilded cage
Hmm.
or an open air
Hmm.
cage and stuff. Now, I'm not trying to be cynical here. I mean, it does sound cynical because now we have bad guys that are quite mastermind and this and that,
Yeah.
and we're also saying that options are likewise. So we're saying so you're saying a couple of options to have people decide, but the illusion, just like so
Hmm.
the so look, I know what so what I'm saying I think is quite sound within this theoretical thing that we're saying because I mean you could take it would be better to say the Matrix, which you haven't seen. I think
No, I have never seen it, but
I think it would be a good idea just in the thing. It would be better to use the Matrix as the example instead of um uh the other one with Jim Carrey.
Truman Show.
It would be better in this scenario to use
Hmm.
the Matrix, but let's but with the Truman Show. Truman had a world created for him
Hmm.
with brands and such and all sorts of stuff, and none of it was real. Now it was all there on purpose. Every
Hmm.
single detail was there on purpose. The stores, the buildings, the products that were sold in the real world outside,
Yeah.
the sunlight, the beach chairs. I mean, it just
Hmm.
went on and on. They were real things
Hmm.
in his world.
Right.
They were options allowed him.
Hmm.
Um, but in the real world, which wasn't as safe,
Hmm.
it was quite chaotic. It's the world that in this thing that we live in, let's say, but that's not the case. See, that's what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we. So anyway, so just I mean, as an option,
Hmm.
it's possible that this is the case, but it's an allegory
Right.
for
Well.
for for the Russian doll stacked within itself.
Hmm.
But Truman was in this world that was catered, built to him in a to a degree, but benevolent,
Benevolent.
benevolent way to
Hmm.
a degree until although he was being used all the time
Right.
because at the end of the day but it was a cozy place for him but he wasn't satisfied with that.
But he was still a prisoner.
He was still a prisoner literally. Well, it's an open air type deal, and there's variations there, but what wasn't acceptable to the powers that be Although they did suggest at the end of the movie where he says he could have left anytime he wanted to. Here's the thing. That's key. This movie's very deep.
Yeah.
Just like The Matrix, I
Hmm.
don't know, people have analyzed it in many, there's endless knowledge one can soup up from,
Right.
but he, when asked, the guy that he said, well, the interview, he could leave whenever he wants. He's not, you just don't like that he likes being in there. He told the girl that was his
Yeah.
girlfriend kind of thing. And the thing is that that was very telling in itself. There's a lot of good parts in that are so
Oh
freaking
yeah.
awesome. Well, that thing that he said, that sentence
Hmm.
he said, where, oh, he could leave whenever he wants, he just doesn't want to,
Hmm.
is analogous to thinking, to stopping, and to looking, and to pausing. It is one of the most that it can be brushed aside and probably has millions of times that it's been watched. But
Sure.
the fact that he could leave whenever he wants, he just doesn't want to. We've built a world for him with all the caterings and whatnot that's necessary. On the flip side of that, so that's one thing, but on the flip side of that, he wasn't happy. I mean,
And
he
he
was,
tried to leave several times.
that's
So
another bit.
he
Yeah.
could leave anytime he wants to. He just doesn't want to was a flat out lie.
And it is a lie.
It was a
Because
lie.
what, well, wait a second. Half and half.
It was
And
a
that's a
flat out lie. He
no,
didn't
no,
know
no, wait,
that
wait, wait,
he
wait.
had the option to leave.
Okay, wait. So let's unpack that. So yes, it was a lie in that they had it set so that every time he was heading in one direction, they would put in its way, and you can connect it to what we're talking about in terms of the media and whatnot,
Mhm.
suggesting the internet. They would put roadblocks in his way,
Mhm.
literal and non-literal, suggestive ones as well, in order to dissuade him from going for that exit. He wanted to go to Tahiti,
Tahiti, yeah.
Tahiti,
Mhm.
Tahiti. Why did Tahiti? Um, the whole movie is freaking radically awesome. Um, he wanted to escape, and so that's true what you're saying. But if he were willing to overcome the obstacles in his way and still do it, they were under the obligation that they couldn't use harm, according
Yeah,
to
they
what people
couldn't
were saying.
use force to keep him there.
So, but he would have to go and break through a paradigm that
But
was so well constructed. Go ahead.
he would have to be aware that there was a paradigm. He would have to be aware that he was being turned back so that it didn't reveal the false environment he lived in.
That's a big problem, Mark, because
So,
you have to be a. Go ahead.
exactly, they controlled the information he received. You said, yeah,
Visually,
he had all these things and all these options that were available in the real world to a point. He had the coffee, the hot cocoa, he had the food that the sponsors paid to be advertised there. So he only knew what was being provided. He didn't have options. Yeah, he had a choice between this candy bar and that candy bar, but he didn't know that there were 400 others out there because those other companies didn't pay for sponsorship on the Truman Show. So they controlled his options, they controlled his movement, they controlled all of the information he consumed.
and what did he get? And here's another question, and it's an obvious question. It's an
Mhm.
obvious answer, I think, but you might say something else. I don't know, because there might be other variables. And what did the ones that manage him in that? world get from all that?
Money and power. They got money and power, and they kept money and power by controlling everything you and I have been talking about.
The movie, um, Truman Show,
Mhm.
is literally an allegory for a lot of things,
Oh yeah,
and it's in our faces.
yeah.
The Matrix one has a similar thing, although it's more into the sci-fi. But
Hmm.
in the Matrix one, instead of money and power, in terms of like what we're talking about with the Truman
Hmm.
Show, humans are used as energy for machines.
Hmm.
Um,
Well.
so, but in order to control them, they have them in a state of unconsciousness in these
Hmm.
pods, and their minds are being fed a worldwide simulation
Hmm.
of the 20th century world. So they would be like you and I today
Hmm.
sitting here. They would have computers, they would have going outside, everything, but they're actually in a simulation and their real selves are stuck in a pod.
So their physical bodies were obedient workers in an electronic sense.
No, they were produced in the movie. I don't know how exactly they said, like when they were showing the protagonist
Hmm.
Neo, he said Neo, the guy that freed him or something. I'd have to be, but just um, he said the real world, and I'm paraphrasing horribly. Humans no longer are born; they're grown.
That's my point. The people in the pod were obedient workers who had no choice
Yeah,
in an electronic sense.
yeah.
Their
Oh no,
bodies were used as a source of energy, and
yeah,
that was it.
yeah, exactly.
Well, take the electronic bit out of it, it's the same as in the movie Metropolis, where everybody is marching to the factory to work. They needed physical labor, whereas this world of the Matrix doesn't need the physical labor. They need the power
The
from these
energy,
beings, the energy from these beings. So it's more or less kind of the same story in a
people,
very different wrapper, of course.
people produce electrical energy,
Hmm. Yeah.
and that's what they're referring to in the movie.
And that's what they're harvesting.
And they harvest that. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
that's the word. Actually, they said where humans are no longer born, they're grown and harvested
Hmm.
to become this. And then he pulls out a Duracell battery
Hmm.
for the machines, and they literally come up like the machines like tentacles, and they suck up the pod,
Hmm.
and then just liquid pours out, and then that liquid is fed back into the pods
Hmm.
to feed the humans with that same liquid. So it's a whole cyclical
Hmm.
cycle of things. And then the whole concept is that Neo is one of those trapped in the pod, living in the paradigm world or Matrix world,
Hmm.
and he and these people that were born in real in the real world that's all just messed up, use machines to go into that mental world
Hmm.
to free people so they can gather an army and fight the machines.
Hmm.
And Neil's just a guy in New York City or somewhere, like a computer hacker, and that's why they need him. And he's got some special, and so it's his discovery of what's actually going on that's amazing in the thing.
Hmm.
It's pretty cool. I like it.
Well, it all comes down to that's how you control people is you take away their options and you be the only source that they need for their life, for their livelihood, for their information, for their sustenance. When you control all of that and you are the only, look at North Korea. North Korea, if you buy a radio, it is tuned to the government channel before you buy it, and you can't change that channel. There's no dial. You are going to listen to the government radio station, and that's it. If all news is controlled by the government, all food rationing is controlled by the government. You may work a farm, but that isn't your farm. So you'll get a certain amount of food, but the rest of it goes to the government. And if the ox that's pulling the plow on your farm dies, that meat belongs to the government. Beef is illegal. It feeds the soldiers and the government officials. And even then, not really the soldiers. It feeds the upper crust of their military. They are under 100% total control, and they can't feed themselves. But the populace is 100% reliant on the government because the government wants them that way. They have no choice. If you try to speak out or even attempt to communicate with a foreigner, you just disappear. And that's how they control that. And that's what I meant when I said it's impossible to control 334 million people, but it's a lot easier to control 120 because those 120 will see to the other 200 million.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, I say the same thing in terms of options,
Mm-hmm.
which you sort of declined and reduced the option factors.
Mm-hmm.
I will agree with that. That you have to have your militants underneath you to do some work. And there's a video that you had shared with me, which I found incredibly awesome months ago, that I replied a long thing to,
Mm-hmm.
if you recall, which
Mm-hmm.
was the construction of hierarchies and how that works in systems and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't see why not. Because that's actually what, even going back into, Europe in the Middle Ages and before,
Mm-hmm.
even to Rome and prior, you had civilizations occurring
Mm-hmm.
because of organization. The problem with everything is that, or not the problem with everything, but one of the problems is that humans are in charge of filling positions. Some
Right.
positions require more authority than others in order to get
Right.
things done at larger layers. But what ends up happening, and Milton Friedman has talked a lot about it, and before him others,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, just brilliant people. That it's just, I mean, thank goodness that they
Mm-hmm.
handed down certain information to give somebody some sense. Um, that what happens is people in power end up starting to believe their infallibility
Mm-hmm.
and start to make moves that are beyond the scope of what is reasonable.
Well,
Um, and
power
maybe
is intoxicating, man. Power is intoxicating and it's addictive.
that's what they say.
And once you sample a little bit of it, depending upon the personality, of course, but once you sample some, you want more. You want, you think you're more and more in control of your life and then eventually of other people's. And that kind of thing is intoxicating, and not everybody can handle it. And usually the people that want it the most are the wrong people for the job. It's just, that's an observation and it's just my opinion. But I think
Well,
the people that want it the most are the worst ones for the job.
it depends on if what they want to get
Well,
done is one. No, I get what you're saying.
it takes a certain amount of ego to want that. You have to believe a certain way. It's kind of like every professional athlete thinks that they are the best at what they do. They have to think that way to be able to perform and to be able to get up to that level. Well, it's no different with people in positions of power. They have to believe that they're the best person for the job if in order to get to that position. So there's a certain amount of ego that needs to be there. But there's a difference between ego and megalomania. And I think we have seen a few layers of megalomania in more than a few people, and I think that if I'm not going to say it and I'll just get myself in trouble, but um there's a thin line. It's easier for guys like you and me and everybody in the chat out here. It's easier for us to spot ego and megalomania and identify them than it is for somebody in that position or even their peers around them, because we're all operating under different blinders with different outlooks on life.
There's no to to push it as far away from the thing um of today's current thing. There's no way that any emperor of Rome,
Mm-hmm.
any decision that they made while in office,
Mm-hmm.
would have suited everyone in the population at large.
And they knew that.
So by default, any decision that these people in power do make is going to tee off a whole slew of people, and a whole other group is going to be quite happy.
Mm-hmm.
And the variable in that, to a great degree, is going to be the handing out of resources. In other words, if resources come my way, generally speaking, there's other factors, but in a general sense, whomever resources are given to, that group will support the resource giver,
Mm-hmm.
even at the expense of others
Mm-hmm.
that where that resource has been taken in
Mm-hmm.
order to hand over to said group. So resources has a lot, if not almost everything to frickin' do with it.
Yeah. And the easiest way to make sure that happens is to control all the resources. And that's when you nationalize things and you say, no, this doesn't belong to a private company. That resource doesn't belong to a private company. It belongs to the government. Let's be honest. Having the full might of the Roman army to enforce your edicts doesn't hurt, so there was that. It's like, look, you can take 100 whatever ducklets, or we can just kill you. It's your choice. I'll take the 100. We thought you'd see it our way.
On this thing about power, although it's not the same thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not even in the ballpark, but it's it's an insight.
Mm-hmm.
When I used to play guitar,
Mm-hmm.
solo and in bands,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed something very particular. I think you might find interesting. So I'm just an average guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Ordinary average guy.
so in various occasions that I played, I can be very descriptive with the situation,
Mm-hmm.
but I realized that as opposed to when I'm out with the guys and friends or whatnot in regular situations and there's girls and whatnot at a bar or here or
Mm-hmm.
there, um, that my attempts at approach and such and this and that were hit or miss.
Mm-hmm.
Hit or miss. Um, but I had to make a certain effort
Mm-hmm.
in order to sort of make something out of it that could possibly turn out or not. And
Mm-hmm.
so there was my involvement, my effort in it in terms of approach and hey, hi, just the normal.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed something when I was playing with guitar in
Mm-hmm.
hand up on stage with the microphone and the lights and sitting on a podium or whatnot in the various occasions where I would literally have women.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm no Mick Jagger, thank goodness. Well, it depends. Um, but I did see. So I played one gig, a place called Jada Cole's, and we slammed that night. In fact, there's a video of it, of one of the songs. We played various songs that evening, and after the performance, a girl from across the way
Hmm.
looked at me dead in the eye from across the freaking bar and the whole thing, and
Hmm.
she just made a straight line towards me, walking, and she, without saying anything, as she was walking, she was telling me all that I needed to know to say, hey, and I remember one of my problems is that I think things
Hmm.
like that. I start things,
Hmm.
but sometimes that can be your worst enemy because
Hmm.
so, because maybe there's another goal and stuff, but I can't help. I'm
Yeah.
saying, and so and I'm thinking to myself, well, hell, she's totally infatuated, and she came up and she stood right in front of me and this and that, and she started hi and this and that, and I couldn't help. And this woman,
Hmm.
dude, dude,
Hmm.
dude. If I were in a regular place,
Hmm.
not a musician that stepped off of the thing and just a guy amongst the crowd,
Hmm.
I'd have to make quite the effort and see if maybe I don't think so.
Hmm.
Maybe yes, maybe no. It's difficult one. It's a difficult one.
Hmm.
But in this scenario, dude, hi, this and that. She was like butter melting. Like, where's my popcorn? Is stand
Hmm.
over my popcorn. Um, but here's the thing. I calculated out, and this is one of my like. She's totally infatuated with a guy that I'm not, and that turned me the hell. So it was a circumstance. Yeah, I know it sounds stupid.
No,
And
it's not stupid at all. I've got a
no,
lot of
it's
thoughts on this.
well, but it's like I'm. She's calculating in her mind because everybody's calculating.
Hmm.
Let's not fool ourselves. Everybody's calculating. We're human beings, right? So it's not like I'm an oddity.
Hmm.
It's, oh, I'm the one that's calculating this and seeing this, and nobody else on Earth. No, other people do too. Well,
Hmm.
she's looking at me and attaching the notions. Well, yes, I am playing. I was playing up there. That's
Hmm.
true. But the idea of all those things making it so that she becomes like fluffy butter in a tub over me was like. And so you know what I did? I was like, oh, thanks a lot. And I just, because it was too there it yes, I did that. And
Yeah, but
later as I was driving home, I was thinking, oh, with look, as I was driving home with my amplifier in the back and this and that, because I had to put it all back in my car.
hmm.
This is not, so I'm not only the singer guy and the guitarist guy, but I'm also the roadie.
And the roadie, the tech, the everybody.
The guy that pumps the gas at the
Hmm.
um. And I'm driving home. I'm thinking to myself, well, damn, Eloy. But I reasoned it out. I was like, yeah, that was kind of like. I mean, it wasn't a.
I
So it's stupid because I should have just said yes. I should. This is but I don't want to be that guy either. I don't want to be at all.
well,
I don't want to
can
be this guy. Yeah, that's me, and I've got my guitar, and it to me, it was hard. So yeah,
I three words come to mind.
yeah.
Dodged a bullet.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Dodged a bullet.
Yeah, because she's
Because
just on the shallow
think
thing.
think about that. The absolute superfluous. Now, I'm not saying you didn't perform well. I'm not saying you didn't sing well.
No, but I was thinking the shallow thing too.
But if this is, don't take this the wrong way. Please don't take this the wrong way. If she could be so enthralled with anyone that much, my mind says, what makes me special? because the next guy that comes up on stage and sings and plays wonderfully,
Yeah, there was a sense of that she's not
you
looking
know,
at the person as, and by the way, she couldn't have looked at the person as the person, because that was just the beginning to get to know the person.
exactly.
But and she wanted to stand out apart from the other ladies, so she said,
Hmm.
"I'm making a beeline for this guy straight up,
Hmm.
because this fish is being plucked out of the water tonight. I tell you what," she was
This one ain't
thinking.
getting away. Yeah.
But
Well,
I'm such a freaking nerd. I'm such a
mhm.
freaking nerd. Like, I really am a freaking nerd in so many ways, that as hot and steaming frickin' dude, I'm talking leather pants. All I know, they were shiny pants and they were black. They might not have been leather, but I remember those damn pants to this day. And
well,
she looked like she looked like, boy, oh boy. And
well,
so
men like women in leather outfits because not only is it a good look, but they also have that new car smell. So,
this happened in various scenarios.
mhm.
And
Well,
the the well, no, let me get to the bit that I'm saying.
mhm.
I'm being honest about it.
Well, no, I am. I get it.
This was my solution to it
Mhm.
at the moment, because the variables, I really, so here's the funny thing, I really was about the music.
Yeah. And
Okay,
and that's but you had to be to get to that point because if you
right,
weren't, you wouldn't have been up on stage.
right. But here's the bit. So I saw that happen a lot,
Hmm.
and it made me realize, if you once or twice or 100 times remove it to a band like, I don't know, Metallica
Hmm.
or the Stones,
Hmm.
or you name your pick,
Hmm.
or solo artists, unless they're Elton John.
Well, even Elton, give him his due.
Okay. Um so imagine,
Yeah.
well, we know, we can look up the stories, they're out there on the thing. And the thing is that I noticed that there's
Hmm.
an aura that's created due to the implication of the scenario, which is, what is the stand what is the cultural understanding of musicians on a stage. That's something that's looked at as a wow, to a degree. Maybe some people not so much, but yes, to a lot of people,
Well,
that's quite the thing. Well, let me just say,
well.
there's a whole industry involved with that,
Hmm.
and whole and so it attaches to the people that are playing that. So it
Right.
could be the nerdiest guy, as an example, and he's the
Hmm.
keyboard player, but
Hmm.
because
He's the
society
keyboard player.
has yeah, because society has grown a template of,
Hmm.
this is rock and roll, this is music. He is now endowed with special magical fairy dust from the
Yeah.
land, from Odin's
Yeah.
chest plate,
Well,
and you
that's
get what
that.
I'm saying.
I do because a lot of people aspire to that worldwide. A lot of people aspire to be that person, but very few make it. Some of it fairly, some of it unfairly. So these are the people that either we or somebody for us has decided are the cream of the crop. Now, you as a performer up on stage, you know, you know how to read an audience and how to read a room. You have to be successful. You know when you've got that crowd, when they're reacting to you, when they're dancing to your music, or when they're getting into it or they're singing along with your songs, you know when you have that crowd. So you have control of that room. You don't have control of the alcohol, but you and your music have control of hitting those little pleasure centers. So that kind of reaction from that girl does not surprise me because at that particular moment, you owned a certain percentage of those people. And they'd have done anything that you could have had them washing your car and they'd have done it.
Well, the
So,
main
it's a very mesmerizing thing from an audience perspective to watch a performer that you really, really like perform. It really can get mesmerizing. And I don't know what it's like from the other side. I don't know what it's like up on stage. I've heard some performers say, I don't even know they're there. But I've heard other performers say, oh no, I feed off that energy from the crowd. So I guess that can go in any direction. But for
Yeah.
that moment, you owned a certain percentage of that room.
Well, the whole thing is that there's a an aspect of power
Mm-hmm.
in this example of musicians and music and such.
Mm-hmm.
There's this notion of uniqueness or power, but I'm more so going for the power of angle of it in terms of what we were talking about before with
Mm-hmm.
people and politicians that make
Right.
decisions and such. Um, this is a small example of a bigger thing. So imagine as you climb up the scale, I could see for me in that scenario, if I were exposed to that over and over again and over and over,
Yeah.
what are you laughing at? Because exactly
No,
that. Um, no, go ahead.
no, I was going to say it's a familiar story, but keep going.
No, wait, let me say it differently. Mark, if I was
No,
exposed
no,
to
no,
that,
no, 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 no. What I'm getting at by a
no,
familiar
let me
story
say,
is you're not the first person I've heard talk about this.
yeah, but I want to emphasize, if I were exposed to it over and over and over again every night, see, that's one way to say it. No, but if I were to repeatedly be, if I were to, because I'm thinking, if I were to repeatedly be exposed to that at some time, at
Mm-hmm.
some point, the bow will break,
Yeah.
and I will be in. I could see myself given in many scenarios, one just falling into the
Mm-hmm.
world reality of what that is and all
Yes.
the things that comes, and it takes a very stern or principled, humans are humans,
Mm-hmm.
so we all falter here and there, but power, and this is a small smidgen of a,
Sure.
but I'm saying that in contrast to what we are talking about before, you could see how people, because from that to being um adore like an Elvis, where people are just or the Beatles,
Mm-hmm.
or any, it could be any musician. At a certain point, if you need to hire security because people just want to tear your T-shirt off and take it home
Mm-hmm.
as a moment, or a chunk of your hair,
Mm-hmm.
or hell, rip off a slice of your freaking arm bone.
Or ambush the cleaning lady coming out of your room and cut up your bed sheets and sell them for $2 a square. You know,
Yeah, at some point, it's not normal.
though none of it's normal. The thing is, it's then that's where personality, ego, and megalomania enter into it because you, a person, it's easy to get addicted to that, and I need it more and more and more. That's what I mean by power is very intoxicating.
Yeah, Napoleon.
And then you start believing your own hype. And that's when we start seeing people kind of jump the shark. They start going off the other side and, well, I can do no wrong because I'm me. And it's like, oh, yeah, you were something 2 years ago. What have you done for me lately?
Napoleon, when he was crowned emperor,
Hmm.
after this whole notion of royals was done away with
Hmm.
in France,
Right.
when he was to be crowned, he couldn't resist. He took the crown, and that wasn't the procedure.
Hmm.
He just grabbed it and placed it on his head
Hmm.
because he was like the power, the power.
Hmm.
At least that's what I'm paraphrasing what's explained in the thing.
Hmm.
I'm sure it just sounds that way, but we don't know the details.
And that's where megalomania comes in because he wanted to be the one to put it on his own head. Because in that moment, when they're ready to place that crown on their head, he's kind of subservient to them. And his ego, his megalomania wouldn't allow that.
Yeah. So there's all these things. So um to to make decisions for so many people, for me, it's. But then again, I'm not in that position. But
Right.
um, there's no correct answer for any decision at that level that will not affect one group as opposed to another, because you're
Yes.
dealing with whole populations of people. And
Well,
so
and even
from
just those people around you, and even just those around you. Sticking with music for just a minute, one of my favorite guitarists, and I tell you about him and you keep laughing about it, Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits. He dissolved the band when they were at their peak. They hadn't yet reached their peak. They were riding high. They were world famous. But he dissolved the band, he said, because it all got too big. And this was not what I wanted. It was supposed to be about the music. They spent so many years traveling around in a van, then they could afford two vans. But it was this group that set up equipment and arranged for meals and this, that, and the other, and did hotel rooms and drove the vans, and we all rode together and this, that, and the other. And then he got to where he said, "You're out on tour and you don't know anybody's name." It went from this group of guys who toured the clubs and we were out there busting our humps to become successful. It went from this little group of maybe 15 people to over 150. And the guy putting out the catering is afraid to talk to me. That's not what we wanted. That's not what I wanted this to become. It became so big, I was lost. There was no friendship, there was no camaraderie. People were moving my equipment, I didn't know their names. He said that I couldn't tolerate, and he just dissolved the band. They broke up, they split up, and he went on with his solo career. That's the absolute opposite of that ego. A good friend of Linda's and mine, her first husband was a bona fide rock star and one of the biggest groups in the world. And she said it took her a while to get used to that kind of lifestyle because you could just say something, you'd be backstage waiting for the show or after the show. You could say something as simple and stupid as, "Man, a Pepsi would be good right now," and a Pepsi would show up. No idea where it came from, no idea who paid for it, didn't know if it came out of a machine or if somebody's cooler. It would just show up. Anything you wanted. I want a turkey sub on rye. It would show up. So having things like that handed to you, she says it's really easy to think that that's how the real world is. And that's how life is. That whatever you ask for, you just get with no consequence, with no regard for who made it, where did it come from, who paid for it, how did it get here. Just, okay, two swigs out of that Pepsi, set it down, and forget it ever existed. You know, and it took her a long time to get used to that concept, and she it never sat right with her. But I had never considered that kind of a thing before. When you are in that kind of, you are in a position of power basically, because all these people around you, those 150 people moving Dire Straits around, they were employees of the band. So if the boss wants, you know, Cheez Its, you get him Cheez Its. It doesn't matter who goes and gets it. They just better be there. It took her a while to get it, never really settled with her. So, it was just one of those weird things that comes along with those trappings. So you can kind of see where people start getting that mentality of, well, don't you know who I am? I'm special. Why
yeah,
do I have to wait in line?
there's a restriction involved in even being in that situation that is no fault of the person, in terms of there's limits now
Mm-hmm.
to regular access to things just due to the popularity of the person. But as far as their being big headed in terms of, oh well, I'm so darn powerful and great,
Hmm.
um, that's also one of the things that happens. But not everybody,
No.
because people are different, and the
Hmm.
situation is so awkward
Yeah.
that some people reject it, just like that Knopfler guy.
Hmm.
Um, and he's not the only one. There's many that reject
Oh
it
yeah.
in different ways, but this grounding factor.
Hmm.
But a lot of people never let the grounding factor get in the way to a palatial
Right.
estate off of Malibu or something like that. Um, it's just not accessible to the majority of people on Earth,
Right.
anyhow. But so it's an awkward situation. But these are, in comparison, these are musicians. They're not Roman emperors, or
Right.
let alone politicians that could decide the
Right.
fate of many from one moment to the next.
Right.
Um, but the constant throughout that is this notion of power and this hierarchy. In fact, I'll just say this one last thing. Um, I don't know what it's called, but it's been a while. But in psychology, there's a thing that's been studied that when people walk into a room
Hmm.
and maybe have a seat to have dinner together,
Hmm.
they sit and greet and all the things that we do in a certain way where the people doing the study can identify hierarchies, because the patterns always, there's always a cascade, not always, sorry, there's a trend towards human beings. It's kind of like we know who mom and dad is.
Yeah. There's a
We know,
hierarchy there. Yeah.
right, there's a hierarchy there. We know who our uncle and aunts are. We know who the kids are. We know their place in society, because they're kids, they're still learning
Hmm.
and growing. The adults have notions. Maybe you have political conversations with an uncle. Maybe it's cooking with someone. It just, there's hierarchies
Yeah.
in baked in and all that, and girlfriends coming over, wives, um, sister-in-laws, and so on. So there's all this stuff that we fall into these patterns, and it's totally human because it is what it
Hmm.
is. We've been
Yeah.
doing it for so darn long. But those people that wish to control
Uh-huh.
study those things as well,
Yeah.
and enact whatever decisive thing that they do in order to control those things or sway those things. And just to wrap the whole thing up, these behaviors in human beings have been and will continue to be even more and more refined, um, studied, cataloged, and using AI, um, for everything from advertising and then some, trends in one way or the other in people's thinking,
Oh yeah.
um, all sorts of things. Um, and some people, like Elon Musk, is very cautious, as an example. He said some things, and others do too, over what is possible with
Yeah.
these artificial intelligent.
Hmm.
Some people think that it could run amok, and or be used by other not so kind or benevolent
Yeah.
actors from other countries and so on and so forth. So, to the detriment of the whole population. So there's a lot of stuff in all this. Um,
Yeah. There's a lot to consider, and there's a lot to work for. There's a lot to think about, and there's a lot of self-examination to be done because, again, we can only control our reaction to things outside of our own little sphere. So, what's going on with AI, we can only control our reaction. We decide if we're going to use it as a tool or if we're going to use it at all.
Yeah, from
I
our vantage, go ahead.
right, but that's the only thing I can control because I'm not on the other side of that fence. I'm not on the inside. I'll be honest with you. I've never I've attempted to use one a couple of times and I found it to be very cumbersome and just not really fun, you know. So I lost interest pretty quick.
What with the AI?
Yes. Now as it gets better, maybe I'll change my mind on that. But it's kind of like, the first computer I had was a Commodore 64 and it was fine for what it did, but it didn't really, I mean, it was fun. I played games on it, but it didn't take over my life. It was, yeah, I could type out a document and print it, or I could sit down and write it myself. It was, to me at the time, more fun to sit at the computer and do it.
No, but you and I
But,
are actually dinosaurs in terms of the
right.
situation.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Where I am with AI is where I was on that Commodore 64. Well, now things have advanced so far. Now I'd be lost without a computer. Whereas before I could take it or leave it. So as it gets better and I learn more, maybe I'll change my mind about it the way I did about computers in general. Because there for a while I was like, well, what's the sense in even having one of these damn things?
Well, that's a good look. That's a
You
good
know?
point too, because so I was leaning towards something else. I was leaning
Mm-hmm.
towards that since we grew up in our respective time periods, not
Mm-hmm.
too distant from each other at all. But then again, that could be argued. Some people say, "Well, yeah, it's
Well,
significant." Well, it is in technology because
yeah.
technology is light years from one. But we both had the Commodore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that my dad was the one that owned it, and
Mm-hmm.
he allowed me to mess with it every now and then. But I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see it as something. So I get what you're saying, and it's true. But so like it's true that like maybe if we find use for it, it gets to a point where. But I, like yourself, have not found myself overly. I'm still quite. Look, it's the generations coming up because I'm
Mm-hmm.
still quite thrilled with the fact that I can go to the Internet Archives.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
still on, but here's the bit. Here's the so in other words, just that ability
Mm-hmm.
is sufficient for me because I can search books. Just that alone
Mm-hmm.
is powerful enough for me to get the things that I want to. But here's the bit. AI, and don't quote me on the number, but
Mm-hmm.
it was that at one point. I don't think it's that anymore. According to what I've heard out there, and I'm sure that it can be investigated like that because we have the AI began with a smaller IQ
Mm-hmm.
equivalent and currently has an IQ of 150 or 160, the equivalent of Einstein. Um, don't 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 fluff that away, Mark.
No, I
Don't.
wasn't. I'm listening.
Oh, okay. Because I'm very adamant about this one. I'm not seriously, but I'm saying because I saw a little bit of a gleam in your eye, and obviously I was wrong. But 150 IQ, and then in the one video where they were, I think it was a TED talk or something like that, they were explaining what that signified in terms of a library of books.
Mm-hmm.
But then they said, and in this next phase, it will have the, and he gave the statistics,
Mm-hmm.
and the library of knowledge um, was exponent until the percentage was off the charts of what it will be.
Mm-hmm.
Where in in that if you ask it a question, specific question,
Mm-hmm.
like let's say you try not try to trick it, but like you give it a curveball type deal,
Mm-hmm.
it's so damn it will be so damn fast with accuracy and variations. If you ask it, give me all the variations for X, Y, and Z, or limit the variations to so on and so on. I want to know this, and that. Give it to me in a summary. Give me a long draft version, or give
Mhm.
me the version for a kid to understand.
Yeah.
It'll do it like that. And and here's the bit: all the information out there,
Mhm.
it scans the whole thing. It's not like Google in that now you have to go sifting through it.
Mhm.
It grabs it all and collates the data, the ones and zeros, and gives you. And it goes into Reddit. It goes into here.
Yeah.
It goes everywhere, and it gives you the squeeze that lemon and that essence of the right right from one moment to the next.
Mhm.
Mind blowing. And
And there are problems inherent in that too.
well, there are, but even if you push that aside, um, for this example that I'm going to secondarily add, and say, okay, let's not even consider that for you and me, and I'm including you because I think it's reasonable to do in this scenario. But you can correct me. I
Mhm.
don't think it's going to be a problem, but you tell me. Pushing that aside, just like you and not considering you and I, just with what we have, honestly, in my opinion, but you correct me. And sure, there's always room for more. There's literally, not literally, there could be, but if you said, Eloy, do me a favor, I need this and this and this, lay it on the table for me, give me, uh, I'll give you 20 minutes or half an hour. There's no reality here that I could not come back in that half an hour and not present you with a fairly decent
Mhm.
um, handover of what you requested from me, just with what we have now, minus the AI.
Right.
If you bring that AI back in, it's
Dude, you got to remember that you're talking to somebody that has a robot in his shop. I can come up with something in my head and sketch it out in the computer, click a few buttons, twirl a few knobs, go outside and mount material, and I can take that idea and make it reality. There's still voodoo in that to me. There
yeah,
is still magical mystery voodoo in that to me.
yeah.
To be able to take something that I find online, let's say King Tutankhamun's mask, I can find that online, and it was never meant to exist. That copy was never meant to exist in the real world. It's supposed to be just a backdrop in a CGI movie. But I can take that model and I can import it into my software, and I can do a little bit of working with it here and working with it there. Then I can go outside and put a piece of wood down on my machine and I can cut that out. It can
I mean,
be something physically tangible that I can hold in my hand. That
I don't want to.
still blows me away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to break from what we're saying, but now that you said that, let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
If this can be done, I'm imagining it can be done.
Okay.
Even though I don't know that you have rotary currently rotary.
I don't, but I know people that do.
Okay, but let me ask you this. I don't know why I'm asking this, but it popped into my head when you said
Go for
Egypt
it.
and this and that. In theory,
Mhm.
I think it's true. You correct me. Could you? Because when you were saying the mask, the Tutankhamun's mask,
Mhm.
I was thinking of the mask sitting on the
Mhm.
flat surface, and you can perfectly. Could you? I know this would be a hard
Mhm.
headache, but could you take a computer thing of a 3D and slice it into sections at the thickness of what the wood would be? Cut
Very
each
easily.
cut each section going downwards to form a 3D version of them
And glue it all together.
and glue it all together?
Yes, sir.
That's some crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I knew where you were going before you finished it. Yes, that's the kind of stuff that I teach.
That's some
Um,
crazy stuff, dude.
I know, I know.
So you see, well, go ahead.
Let me see how it's going to open there.
Share that. Give me one half a second. Literally.
Okay,
Well, not
alrighty.
literally.
Okay, figuratively. Oops, 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 oops. Yeah, let me bring it up here, and I will do this. I will do this. I will do this. And the minute he comes back in, he will see what I'm talking about. Now, I only wish that that was a better version of that. So, yeah, um, Tutankhamun's mask, I could very easily do that.
Oh, that's pretty freaking awesome, dude. So yeah,
There is the model.
that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So wait a second. Could you?
Now this is hollow, but I could lay it down and import it and then cut it into sections in slices and make it as big as you would like.
And then do a glue up.
Uh-huh.
Could
Then
you
glue the
also?
parts
So
together.
so wait a second. So any so this would mean any, let's say, um there's a word for it. I guess it's just 3D. Any 3D model
Hmm.
could, depending on skill and whatnot. So like let's say if you had a thing like, let's say, a copy of your house.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yes, I could. I could do anything that I have a model for. Let's go with the owl. There we go. Now I could cut that this way, slice it that way. I could lay it on its back and slice it that way. If I had a rotary attachment, I could attach one piece of material and it would rotate and cut the whole thing for me. Again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I understand all of it, but I know I can do it because I've learned to use the software that does that.
That's pretty freaking amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. And there is still, again, some magical mystery voodoo involved in that. To take something that is in someone's imagination that was never meant to exist in the real world, model it or draw it, and then there's a lot of work involved. Don't get me wrong. That's not like that. You're going to have that in 20 minutes. That may be a couple weeks work, but it's possible to take that thing out of your brain and have it hold it in your hand, after so many hours of work.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing is still mind blowing to me.
Yeah, let alone what's
Hmm.
constantly updating in the world of
And it's,
AI.
and as more of them come about, more and more of them are made by more and more companies, and the price comes down. They're in garages all over the country, they're in shops all over the world. A machine that used to come with a six, sometimes seven-figure price tag that only multinational corporations could afford.
A regular
A
Joe.
regular a regular guy can buy one with his tax refund and with a little bit of studying start making stuff in his garage or her garage.
Isn't it? So another bit about all this is that no wonder, kind of like what you said, I forget the specifics of the story,
Hmm.
but you said something to the effect of someone you knew or some conversation, and they said, well, they've invented all there is to invent, so we're good. I mean, the point that I'm the reason I'm trying the reason I'm pulling this one out is because the essence of it that I'm partial to in this scenario is the fact that that person, whoever the scenario is, if you remember, would have had enough cool stuff at their given time in that era, whenever that was, that extra stuff, whether cool or not, they had their handful with a given, what they had going, if that makes any sense.
Um,
Do you remember that conversation?
I do remember that conversation.
You forget who,
It
though.
was 1889. The guy's name is Charles Dewell, and he was the commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office. And he said in 1889, everything that can be invented has been invented. And, you know, when you think in his time frame, 1899, okay, it wasn't even the 20th century yet. He
Yeah.
had no idea what was coming up, but using his the
Window.
technology of available at the time, steam power predominantly. I mean, and I think every generation has had an inkling of that. I can remember having a similar mindset when I was about 14, 15 years old. In that, well, we've got stereo television, we've got color television, we have stereophonic sound on cassette
Yeah, this
and
one's running.
FM stereo in the car. We've got entertainment 24/7 whenever we want to watch.
And that was back then.
Whenever we want to listen to it, we can do it. I can get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I can drive down to 7-Eleven and I can get me a Coke if I want one. What more could a person want? I can pick up my phone and I can call my girlfriend 35 miles away and talk to her for as long as I'd like. And it not even cost me a nickel. What else would you want? What more could anybody need? What else is there to invent? So I think just about every generation has had that mindset, at least briefly, you know?
Yeah. And everybody's up to date
Hmm.
according to the time that they're in,
Hmm.
roughly. So a
Yeah.
person in the 1870s, there were cities with high rises, the
Hmm.
major metropolises at the time. I mean, they weren't like
Yeah.
today, but they had their stories up. They had their service stores on the bottom. They had their agencies for this and that and whatnot.
Well,
They had
d-
their commerce. I mean,
well, dude, the Empire State Building was built in it opened in the 1930s. And it had its own zip code, its own post office, and its own subway stops. That's how important it was. So, yeah, and we're talking in the 1930s, almost 100 years ago.
yeah. So people for in their respective eras,
Hmm.
according to their understanding, were up to date.
Hmm.
And
What else could we want? What else could there be?
but if you forward it to us sitting here now,
Hmm.
we have more access to data than many countries did, like the governments of those countries, maybe to 150 years, definitely further than a
Oh,
um
yeah.
the further back the worse it gets. But a one person sitting in their room across the world right now with
Hmm.
their Google and their internet and whatnot has more access to information than people did
Yeah.
just
Well,
a couple of decades ago itself.
well, here's an example right here. Jim Dockerell's with us here in the chat. Greg's not here, but we could talk to him right now in Canada. 40 years ago, we couldn't do that. I would have to know his number be able to call him on the telephone. But how do I get his number? How do I even know he exists? You know, with this stuff on the internet, with all of this going on, I have talked to people in Brazil.
Amateur
I've
radio.
I've talked to, yeah, if you had a
This
license
is
for,
Big Jimbo up in Canada,
but
reaching out
you
to the worldwide radio.
but you had to study for and take a test to get a license. Then you could go buy a ham radio, which wasn't cheap. I mean, your dad could have probably told you that they were not cheap. But
Yeah.
you know, now just me, some schmuck. I've talked to people in Brazil, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, lots of people in the UK, lots of people in Canada, all over the place. And all of that's possible because of this keyboard, this monitor, this camera, and this computer over here.
And
That I don't even think about it.
notice how quickly we normalize
Hmm.
extraordinary things.
Yeah, it is normal. I don't even think about it. I just do it. I'm going to talk to a
It's
guy in Tennessee, video conference with a guy in Tennessee tomorrow. I've done it 3 times already in the last 7 days. I don't even think about it. It just happens. I just do it.
We've done 262 episodes,
Hmm.
and even this,
Still amazing, isn't it?
yeah, because I'm in Sweetwater,
Hmm.
talking to Oregon. Can you 10-4?
Roger, over. What?
It's and not only that, the image coming through.
Yeah.
No, but let me qualify this. Not 20 years ago or less, freaking
Hmm.
less. This quality of image
Unthinkable.
was
Un-
unthinkable.
yeah, unthinkable. I mean, we were taking pictures with potatoes, basically. You know, we need to go ahead and land the plane. But before we do, I just want to throw something else out there. We were talking about, we spent most of the night talking about control. And yep, there's the other Kanaka Stanley checking in. Yes, us guts are still on the air. Um, we were talking about control and we were talking about musicians. Here's another aspect of control that I'm willing to bet you never considered.
That's a bold statement, Mark Lindsay.
Tell me if I'm wrong.
I will.
When
I will
you're
be honest.
when you're up there on stage and you're performing, I don't know how you did your performances. I don't know what kind of frame of consciousness you slipped into. I know most musicians and most singers do slip into kind of a different state. Maybe you fed off the crowd. Maybe you weren't even observant of the crowd. Maybe you didn't even know they were there.
I
You were
become
just up doing their thing.
I become my alternate ego, Alice.
Alice, okay. Alice Bowie, right? Yeah, there you go. Um, but think about this. How many kids, well, they wouldn't be kids now. How many people are alive today because you played a certain song while you were up on stage and made some dude get his girl to get up and dance? And that put them into a romantic mood. And 9 months later, they had a baby.
That's true.
How many kids are you responsible for bringing into the world with your music?
Yeah,
Did
you're right.
that ever come into your head?
No, but that's true. But again, the music, well, but yeah. So as a consequence to my being in a place
Mm-hmm.
and striking the right chords at the right time
Mm-hmm.
caused the drink to slightly gull it down further and ushering the lady and man into the car in a romantic escapade that led
Well,
to
onto
set
the
apart.
dance floor that then led to that romantic
Yeah,
escapade. But yeah.
yeah, and then all of a sudden, bam, yeah, that's something that I had not thought about. But we are, um, involved in consequences that we're not aware of. Yes. Yeah.
That's what I started laughing at when you were talking about being up on stage and that girl locked eyes with you. And I thought to myself, well, how many other people got that same feeling with the person they were with? That's why I started laughing when you were talking about that, because that
Yeah.
thought crossed my mind. Wait a minute. How many people are alive today because Eloy sang the right song at the right time?
Well, I could just as a final note,
Hmm.
I could tell you this. I'll tell you this one in an opposite scenario.
Hmm.
Due to my stubbornness in terms of even before I understood what libertarian meant,
Hmm.
there's a philosophy behind it. Okay, so I'm
Hmm.
speaking to that,
Okay.
which is you're not going to force people
Hmm.
or bend their will in terms of you're gonna try to be honest because the result will. So, anyways, I had the opportunity to convince a girl that I adored, but I
Hmm.
was very young at the same time. She came to visit me in the mall. We had broken up, but she came after a while to actually confront me and say, "Look, I'm gonna get married," which was a key signal for me to convince her not to. Because if not, why even bother with me? So are you gonna But she said it in that way, and my decision was, well, if this is her choice, like I analyzed it instead of the right. Well, the right thing was whatever happened, but if I were to have pushed aside my reasoning, um, I would have gone off with her. But what I did was I said, well, if this is your decision, I was very logical about it. If this is your decision and this is the choice, I mean, what can I tell you? I guess I'm happy for you. I mean, I couldn't if it's your true decision. And so I went analytical with it.
Hmm.
Then what I should have done is listen. I can't resist being without you. So drop that character and let's do this right, okay? Or
Hmm.
something to that effect. Well, no, I
Yeah.
didn't do that.
You
I
didn't
did
put your selfish self interest first. Yeah.
right because of it's just. But anyways, I did that, and due to that, kids were born.
Yeah. Well, okay.
You
So,
see what I'm saying?
yeah, Eloy the Godfather, you are responsible for life on this planet.
But you see how it is though,
I do. I do.
because if
What
it,
you never know where your decisions are going to finally lead.
right.
Because if you hadn't have split up with her to begin with, you probably would have never met that guy and definitely wouldn't have gotten that involved with him.
And no, well, I don't
Unless,
know.
unless he was the reason you guys split up. I mean,
No. Well, the point is that, well, very very directly, it's that decisive moment that
Mhm.
set her out on the alternate path, which
Right.
was actually the this world path
Hmm.
that ended up her having whatever children and whatnot,
Hmm.
as a consequence to that, where
Hmm.
by one stroke of a decision, um, it could have been that those humans are would not have been alive. And
Yeah.
so, isn't it that life is a series of that anyhow?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Yeah. Life is a series of things like that.
Life is a series of things like that. I want to end it with one other little detail, and we'll be done with it,
Okay.
unless you have something
No, I
for
got nothing else.
on a similar note of me pushing the envelope because I don't know. It's just I can't, like John Lennon said, I can't help but be who I am, and that's unfortunately or fortunately or somewhere in between at times what it is. And John Lennon said that. It's John Lennon had a bunch of great quotes. Um, I asked my dad one time. I said, "Well, Dad, because the key here was that it was always the Castro situation,
Hmm.
which was very pertinent because it's the Cuban exile community." And but I, young, asked him questions that I said, "Well, Dad." in a way, I said, shouldn't we be thankful? Because if it weren't for what happened in Cuba, I wouldn't exist because none of you would have come over here in order to meet here, marry, and have me. So in a strange, I told my dad, I was a
In a
kid.
self, yeah, in a
I said,
selfish way, yeah.
and I said, so Dad, in a sense, wasn't it good? And my dad, he looked at me and he said, no, it doesn't work that way. And he walked away like he wasn't happy with it.
He couldn't. Yeah, okay.
And so, yeah, so stuff
Mhm.
like that. Anyways, um,
Yeah.
because you have to. How can you thank
Hmm.
um an emperor of Rome that cast the whole society out into the outskirts of the empire,
Hmm.
and due to that outcasting, you had other children be born due to the malevolence of one
Hmm.
character. Other things happened, and
Well,
life is like that.
well, it's also depends on how far you want to reach, too. So, yeah,
No, but it's
but it is, and,
quite
and that's
accurate.
and this is what I mean when I say it's nothing but luck. Be it good or bad, it's nothing but luck.
My mind said my mind, the word that popped in my mind was destiny. But yes, I know what you're saying, but it's
Hmm.
random events and whatnot. But my mind, because I also have certain beliefs and stuff, but
Well,
not
sure.
so. But so in my mind, I thought that, but at the same time, at the cost of this, other things happen that may not be, for sure, not bad for me. Because hey, look, I'm moving
Yeah,
around. Look, but that's an undesirable thing to sit and think. Well, because of
yeah.
this dictator, all these people now exist in Russia, as an example.
Hmm.
That's true.
Yeah.
So it's a weird thing to think about. Anyways, we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Because I think it's quite a curious
It
situation.
yeah, yeah, and if you want to analyze it enough, it sure gets more curiouser.
Yeah, it does. It does. Um, anyways, so listen, folks. Thank you for hanging out with us. We go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time. We're the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. We have a site over on Facebook, same name, as well as a .com over on the web, trampledunderfoot.com. You can podcast trampledunderfootpodcast.com, so you could go check
Yes.
that out as well. And we're sponsored by
Harneal Media, your media connection. Notice how I changed that up this time?
yeah.
Look, folks, just you and me here talking, hanging over the back fence with a glass of iced tea or a cup of coffee or the beverage of your choice. If you offer a product or service to sell, you owe it to yourself to talk to Steve over at Harneal Media because not only is he good at what he does, he's very competitively priced and he knows he can show you that the best way to get that product and that service out in front of as many eyes as you possibly can is by creating your own website, setting up your web store, offering your product and your service to us, the teeming millions out here. There's a link to Harneal Media in every single episode of the Trampled Underfoot podcast. So hit him up. He's very good at what he does. He's very competitively priced. That's Harneal Media, HARNEAL Media.com, sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
All right. So, just as an aside for you guys that were with us, if you get a chance, um, and you like that sort of like survivalist end of the world thing, movie, Leave the World Behind is, in my opinion, worth watching. It's interesting. We did run through it, so keep that one in mind. But for sure, let us know how many of you, before we take off, if you want, have seen The Matrix and the what's the other one? Wait,
The Truman
Truman
Show.
Show. Right. If you've seen those, I think that they all have a certain connection with each other. But either way, we thank you guys for hanging out. We hope you enjoy the rest of the week and you have a great time doing the things that you love and be safe doing so. and we'll catch you next week right here, actually, same bat channel. Laters.
Peace. Awkward wave.